Muy bien. Pues buenos días, buenas tardes. Les agradecemos la paciencia. Tenemos reverberación de sonido. Bueno, ahora sí. Bien. ¿Sigue? ¿Sigue la reverberación? No, ya no. Bien, vamos a iniciar. Buenas tardes, vamos a iniciar la conferencia que nos va a impartir la doctora Dori Tunstall. Voy a hacer una muy breve reseña de su currículum, pero antes quisiera agradecer desde luego a la doctora Dori Tunstall que nos acompaña. Dori, bienvenida a México, muchas gracias. Welcome to Mexico. Y también nos acompaña el director de la Facultad de Arquitectura, Juan Ignacio del Cueto, quien amablemente también decidió hacer un espacio en su agenda para estar en esta primera sesión del evento que hemos preparado entre la licenciatura del Centro de Investigaciones de Diseño Industrial, la Facultad de Arquitectura y el posgrado de Diseño Industrial. Tenemos con nosotros verdaderamente a una persona con un currículum excepcional. Ella originalmente es antropóloga, diseñadora, intelectual pública y defensora de diseño que trabaja en las intersecciones de la teoría crítica, la cultura y el diseño. Dori es la primera mujer afroamericana que funge como decana de la Facultad de Diseño en el Ontario College of Art and Design University. Ella es una líder reconocida en el tema de la descolonización de la educación, del arte y del diseño. Como ven ustedes, es un tema polémico, es un tema que está impactando el mundo del diseño, es un tema que para nosotros resulta muy interesante, sobre todo por estos aspectos de descolonización, y que consideramos que su presencia y las ideas que pueda compartir con nosotros serán muy importantes. Ella tiene una carrera global, pues Dori fue profesora asociada de Antropología del Diseño y decana asociada en la Universidad de Swinburne, en Australia. En Estados Unidos enseñó en la Universidad de Illinois en Chicago, organizó la Iniciativa Nacional de Política de Diseño de Estados Unidos y fue directora de Design for Democracy. En la industria ocupó puestos de estratega en UX en Sapient Corporation y ARC Worldwide. Dori es doctora en antropología por la Universidad de Stanford y licenciada en antropología por Bryn Mawr College. Dori, bienvenida a México. Y no, si quisieras darnos algunas palabras. Sí.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todas y todos quienes están aquí en el auditorio de la Unidad de Posgrados de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México y también a quienes están a la distancia, quienes nos siguen por las redes. Realmente es un honor tener aquí a la doctora Elizabeth Tunstall, Dori, y particularmente tenerla en el ámbito del diseño industrial, pese a que ella es antropóloga, pues ha incursionado en temas de diseño y de eso va a tratar esta estancia que va a tener entre nosotros a lo largo de esta semana. El día de hoy con una conferencia magistral inauguramos su participación. La conferencia se titula Hacia el diseño respetuoso. Y bueno, estamos en esta sede de la unidad de diseño industrial, perdón, de la unidad de posgrado y la relación es precisamente con el programa de posgrado en diseño industrial, que tiene una maestría y que estamos trabajando el doctorado en diseño transdisciplinario, que esperamos vea la luz en el transcurso del próximo año. Mañana se va a unir a estas actividades la doctora Andrea Botero de Aalto University en Finlandia para tener una mesa de discusión con la doctora Tunstall titulada Diálogos entre el diseño y la antropología. Esto ya va a ser en el espacio de usos múltiples en el CIDI, en la Unidad Multidisciplinaria de la Facultad de Arquitectura de la UNAM. El miércoles 7, un conversatorio en el auditorio principal del Instituto de Investigaciones Antropológicas, que también está integrado en estas actividades de la doctora Tunstall, y allí se tendrá este diálogo titulado El impacto de la antropología en el diseño. Y finalmente el viernes 9, la conferencia de clausura de esta estancia de la doctora Tunstall entre nosotros, el diseño afroamericano y su relación con el sur global. Celebrar este tipo de intercambios, este tipo de relaciones, este tipo de lazos institucionales, particularmente con académicos y académicas, también en su momento con alumnos y alumnas, pero el hecho de tener entre nosotros a la decana de la Facultad de Diseño en la OCAD, en la famosa OCAD, esta Ontario College and Art and Design de Toronto, pues es para nosotros un privilegio. Así que desde la Facultad de Arquitectura de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México le damos la más cordial bienvenida. Dori, bienvenida y que tengas muy buena estancia en México. Me decía que es la primera vez que viene a la Ciudad de México. Como es antropóloga no se llevará demasiado susto, pero esperemos que tenga la riqueza que tiene nuestra ciudad como laboratorio antropológico. Es fantástica. Bienvenida.
Gracias. Reseñamos los territorios tradicionales y ancestrales de la náhuatl, mexicana y ñaña.
Vamos a pasar al auditorio.
Okay, bueno. ¿Quiénes son los constructores en propietarios originarios de la tierra en la hoy que reunimos? Acknowledge the traditional and ancestral territories of the Nahua, Nishika, and Hanyanyu Otomi, who are the original custodians and owners of the lands in which we are meeting. This land acknowledgement is a really important practice that I practice wherever I go around the world. It is about, at least in OCAD University in many places, our commitment to recognize the indigenous peoples, and it's part of our practices of decolonization, which I'll talk a lot more about in my presentation. So my talk is Diseño Respetuoso, Descolonización en el contexto canadiense, respectful design, decolonization in the Canadian context. I hope in many ways to speak briefly, mostly because I want to have the opportunity for us to engage in dialogue about what are the similarities and differences between the possibilities of decolonization of design here in Mexico and in Canada, which are all part of North America. Sobre mi institución. So, OCAD Universidad es la institución de arte y diseño más grande en Antigua de Canadá. Tiene 148 años. Soy la decana de Facultad de Diseño, que es la mejor de las 3 facultades de Oka University. Hay 2,800 estudiantes y más de más de 50%, ¿cómo se dice 50? 50% de los estudiantes son de origen non-European, so indigenous o lo que llamas en Canadá racializados o negro, asiático, latino, Medio Oriente. Entonces, es la contexto de trabajo de decolonización porque la mejor de los estudiantes have experiencia la colonización. Sobre Oka Universidad en el diseño respetuoso. Hay una dicho, diversity as una invitación, right? To receive an invitation, right? Inclusion, in many ways, ser inclusivo es to be asked to dance, bailar, es un bailar. Yo pienso que el diseño respetuoso es una fiesta de calle. Hay todas las personas pueden celebrar Oka Universidad está implicado en la colonización de Canadá. La colonización es la soberanía indígena de la tierra. Es muy importante recordar porque hay muchas personas usaron la palabra decolonización porque no hay relación con la tierra en las personas indígenas. Pero en diseño, que era un diseño liberador del proyecto modernista. What can I mean by that? Es importante. Yo vivo en Canadá. Yo nací en los Estados Unidos. Hay 2 lugares colonialistas. En Canadá es un estado colonial, which means hay 3 tipos de personas, gente indígena, los colonos y esclavos. Los 3 personas tienen una relación diferente a la tierra y a las políticas asimilacionistas. So I'll explain a little bit of what I mean by that. So, you know, the relationship to the land in the settler colonial state, the land is stolen and pillaged. In terms of like government policies, the policy is often genocidal against those who are non-European. And this gets affected in design. Like design is estaba implicado en ese proceso. Por ejemplo, siempre hay un problema con como el, ¿cómo se dice? Misappropriation. Muchos tiempos es la diseño de los personas indígenas están misappropriated. Misappropriated. Por ejemplo, en este foto, I'm going to go switch into English because es muy complicado para mí español. So this company called K2Z, the British company, they stole a design created by an Inuit shaman named Awa. And they, one can imagine the design process where the probably very junior designers was Googling some image for inspiration and came up with, this image of what again is a very beautiful, very cool design. But because in the story that we tell about indigenous peoples, that often there's a story that's told that, let's say, the policies, políticas asimilacionistas were very successful, right? No hay los personas indígenas, right? There's an erasure of indigenous people. So the designer and the company didn't think to contact the living descendants of the shaman Awa, which existed. Didn't think to connect with the Inuit community to ask permission to use the design. And this happens again and again. Each week there's another scandal about some designer taking the design of, again, especially indigenous communities and indigenous people. And so this is how design is implicated in the colonial project, right? Because the attitudes that we share in society affects the way in which we make our designs. And if we are not thinking about the lived experiences of contemporary indigenous people, then we don't do the actions of respect, the actions of consent in order to establish collaboration and partnership in how we design. Also, por la raza negra, en el proceso de colonización, muchos tiempos fueron traídos involuntariamente a la tierra. Por mí es muy interesante porque políticas asimilistas en las políticas asimilistas no asimilable. It's not possible to assimilate porque the idea de la supremacía blanco means that negro es muy, muy bajo, right? Mi nombre es Elizabeth Tunstall, un nombre inglés. Mi primera lengua es inglés. Pero las personas negras, especialmente en Canadá y Estados Unidos, necesitamos decir mi vida matters, es importante, right? Black Lives Matter. por qué en las instituciones de salud, educación y especialmente justos or lack of justos, no, lack of justice, la vida, la perspectiva de las personas negras no es importante, right? And I say by design, it's not important. And las personas, como se dice, POC, personas de colores, experiencia mucho discriminación pero es diferente de las personas indígenas y las personas negras, porque mucho tiempo escapan de casa para convertirse en nuevos colonos, right? Es la relación de la tierra. Tiene un privilegio de guerra y asimilar. What do I mean? Las personas make mucho difícil decisions sobre la lengua, hablar la lengua o no hablar la lengua, asimilado or no asimilado. So it's a very difficult position to be in because you're always making hard choices between what you leave behind and what you embrace. But the decisions are ones of survival, and the decisions are always painful and often create intergenerational strife from those decisions that previous generations make. And so even though in their relationship there is more choice, which is not possible for Indigenous people in the same way, not possible for Black people in the same way, they make those choices, but still experience lots of discrimination, right? Which is the context for those choices. And so I show this image. This is an ad from 1886 for washing powder, an advertising ad. And what it is celebrating is the passage of the anti-Chinese Immigration Acts of 1882 in the United States and 1885 in Canada. And so again, when I'm teaching advertising class and I have to explain the history of advertising and I show this to my students of Asian heritage, they have to stop and think, is this a place for me? If this is the history of advertising, what does it have to do with me? Is this a good place? Am I safe here in practicing design? So it's important to tell these histories because, again, they're all part of this story that we tell about design as something that came from Europe in the 1800s. And for many communities, that relationship has not been positive, has not been good. And even, you know, we think so much about the Proyecto Modernista, right? Progreso, a través de la tecnología para las masas, right? Technology for the masses will bring progress. In humanidad universal, so leave your ethnicity behind, right? And in a context of Europe, this is revolutionary, right? If you think of the practitioners of the Bauhaus, this was so threatening to many of the countries that they had to leave. They had to leave Germany They had to leave Europe because the ideal of, in a society as aristocratic as Europe, right? The ideal of providing a good life for the masses is utopia. In a context of thousands and years of war in Europe, the ideal of let's ignore German black face type. Let's ignore the cursive of Italian type. Let's drop all of these markers that keep us separated into this universal sense, sans serif sense of design. Again, quite revolutionary and utopian. But when you bring those same ideas into the context of North America, let's say, then those values of design han sido y son todavía coloniales, supremacistas, blancos, patriarcales y capitalistas. And son valores of great harm, as I say to many of my students. So, what do you do? Es la historia. Yo vivo aún. What do you do? You change. You recognize the ways in which design has been disrespectful, and you create a context for a more respectful design. So I'm going to show, I won't show the video because it'll get confusing because we have time. So I want to show some of the work of my faculty. Often I give presentations and I focus on my students, but I want to focus on my faculty because they have been leading in many ways what it means to practice Diseño Respetuoso. So we talk about this, we define it as valuing inclusivity, people's cultures and ways of knowing. The opposite of colonialism. And conozca a Howard Munro, cuyo trabajo cambia lo que esto significa. Es Red River Métis de Winnipeg. En Canadá hay 3 tipos de personas indígenas. First Nations primero, Nations primero. Métis and Inuit. So Howard es de Métis, de los 3 grupos indígenas. Y es un profesor asistente de diseño industrial. Y llegó a nosotros como miembro de la facultad seguramente de la tendencia a través de una contratación de clúster indígena. And so he came as one of our cluster hires, in which we hired at OCAD University 5 profesores indigenistas in un año, in 1 year. And so what his work has been focused on is to introduce indigenous forms and ways of being into industrial design. So he says he's not a traditionalist, but he's familiar with traditional materials. So, but what he's interested in is in that intersection that is the contemporary experience of being indigenous, right? Of making products that speak to the moments we are today. So this is in the image here, you see the heart scan, which is actually from the birth of his son. But you also see the feathers and you see the porcupine quills and those things, the perspective indígena exist in contemporary form, which his work brings together intimately, right, as a reflection of who he is. What he's also been doing is introducing indigenous ways of knowing into current industrial design practice. So what he's done is reformulado el proceso de diseño para que esté alineado con los enseñanzas de los 7 abuelos, so the 7 grandfather teachings. And I don't have full permission to show all of this, I just want to show, but I'll give you this as a sneak peek. So in his work that he's done, he's taken the different phases of the design process, so define, analyze, ideate, et cetera, and align them with the 7 grandfather teachings. And the 7 grandfather teachings are principles of being, respect, love, honesty, well, truth, humility, et cetera. And so he's taken design phase, which is about the external output of a phase that moves into a next phase, and turned it into something that's internal. So the research analysis phase is the respect phase. And respect is about knowing what you know and knowing in many ways that there are others out there who know more. And so having that respect for other ways of knowing, other ways of being, the gap between you and all of your relations that exist in the universe. Respect is that research, is that process, right? Where you show your respect by going out to understand what it is that they know in a respectful way. Again, in an act of humility, right? So they all go together. So he's been doing this work to help us rethink what design is in terms of the kinds of people it is seeking to cultivate, not just the kinds of outputs that it puts out there in the world. Diseño respetuoso significa diseñar futuros con inclusión en pertenencia para todos y todo. So respectful design means designing futures of inclusion and belonging for everyone and everything. So this is Rani Lee, as una profesora asociada de diseño industrial. Ella es canadiense de Filipina, de herencia chino, which is, again, speaks to the complicated nature of identities in Toronto. And she works very closely with a community called Regent Park, which is in the center of Toronto, especially with a group called the Regent Park Sewing Circle. So she develops soft goods. Her specialty is soft goods. And so our students pre-pandemic would go to Regent Park for their class in circular design with the course. And they would collaborate with the women of the sewing circle. So they would do the research with the women of the circles. They would develop design ideals that are relevant to the community, that made sense for the community. And then the women of the sewing circle would then learn to sew the specific projects, improve the design based on what was possible for it to be sewn and the complexity of it. And then the designs belonged to them, and they would then manufacture them to be sold in their, in what was a shop, a community shop that they had. And this is a relationship that has gone on for 7 years now, working, and it's been really important to change the idea of our industrial design students for who are you designing for? Who is your community? Because there's an expectation that you design for mass manufacturing. But our students are learning, how do you design with community? And so these are just some of the products that they developed. Just really beautiful, beautiful work. And then now this year, they organized a incubator space called Design With, which is inside of Eaton Center Mall, which is the largest mall in Canada and one of the largest malls in North America. So they partner with Cadillac Fairview, who's the owner of many of the malls, to set up a shop where they give workshops. On circular design. So actually, you'll see later, the bag that I'm carrying today is the product of this work, where they had taken the banners, the street banners from OCAD University, and recycled them. The women from the Regis Park Sewing Cycle created bags out of them, which then they sold. I was there on Black Friday to buy my bags, which then they resold with, again, the profit being shared between the students and the women of the sewing circle. And so again, this is the work of being in community and understanding who you're designing for, which is part of respectful design. El diseño respetuoso significa que debemos reconocer que podemos hacer tanto daño como bien. So recognizing that we can do harm as well as good. And this is one of my favorite stories. So this is Sarah Tranum, who's one of my canadienses de herencia de colonos europeos and professor Hacia de innovación social, a social innovation professor. And she used to provide a studio abroad, first with India and then in Costa Rica. And it was one of those things that, again, part of the transformation that when she first started, a lot of the work felt it was colonial, probably is the best way to say it, just colonial, in the sense of it being kind of excursions of go once to a community, do a really quick project that may have no significance afterwards, and then leave, right? So there wasn't a relationship that was established. There wasn't a sense of mutual exchange. And so we had long conversations about the work she was doing and why she was doing it and how we can continue to have her do the work and she do the learning of how to do it differently. And so, so we worked really hard in terms of finding new partners where there was opportunity, not just for students coming in 1 year, but like students as an institution building a multi-year relationship with the community. So we found another set of partners to facilitate that. The other thing that she did was also, again, focus on projects that really were being called for by the community itself, right? And that had sort of long-term impact. Also, focusing close at home and working with communities as well in terms of developing social impact, so that you have a potential for exchange. So it's not just a matter of like, okay, university students going to Costa Rica or whatever, but we engaged with a community project called Sketch, And in that project, you know, again, establish relationships around social innovation, where, again, there's accountability. They're down the street. So how do we teach our students how to practice accountability in that way so that when they do go overseas, that same relationship of accountability is part of how they think about being a designer. And so in many ways, she's changed the way in which she's worked, to change the way in which we work. We work very closely on programs that bring, again, artisans from Costa Rica to Canada. We are having a call for our Indian arts program to bring artists and designers from India to spend 6 weeks with us at OCAD University in the fall. So again, making sure that the relationships are in exchange and not extractive. And that's change, that's respect, right? Showing respect to design. So how do we engage in diseño respetuoso? Well, you have to find out what it means to you. You have to have hope for positive change. Like I always start with like the gloom and doom story because it shows you how much an institution can change. And this change has only happened in the last 5 or 6 years, right? And again, just being willing to bring about the change. Because the place where we are now as an institution is, you know, our students believe the values of design are communal. The values of design is non-hierarchical. The values of design is inclusive and an embracing of all of the nuances of identity that our students bring. And it's becoming closer and closer to being decolonial. In the sense we have now 6 full-time Indigenous faculty members, 1 for each of the 6 programs, and we're going through a process of building Indigenous learning outcomes into all of our courses. And so that, I think, is it in terms of my presentation. I hope we have time for lots of questions and conversation. Muchas gracias. So how does this work?
Muchas gracias, Dori. Muy bien, pues pasamos a la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Dori entiende bastante bien el español, así que si quieren hacer las preguntas en español, se las podemos hacer en español. Y veremos la manera de traducirlo. ¿Alguna pregunta entre el público, alguna inquietud, alguna observación? Aquí ya tenemos la primera. Adelante, por favor. Te van a pasar el micrófono para que te escuchen, sobre todo los que están viendo la transmisión por vía remota. Gracias. Muchas gracias. Yo me gustaría hacer una pregunta. ¿Cuáles serían las implicaciones que ha tenido, por ejemplo, insertar un discurso de diseño respetuoso dentro de un paradigma de diseño tradicional? Bueno, sabemos que el diseño tiene de esta visión cosmopolita, ¿no? De esta visión, pues, ahora, ¿cuáles han sido como estas implicaciones de debates que han surgido a partir de hablar de cómo se hizo? Confront with a design board that is very, very European your points of view.
Okay. I would say less difficulties and more anxieties. ¿Cómo se dice anxiety?
Ansiedades.
Ansiedades. Porque tenemos, well, when we first started, 88% de mis profesores son blancos. Ellos pensando, or thinking, where do I belong in Nueva Mundial, right? In this new world. So we had to have many difficult conversations about the anxiety, right? We gave a workshop called Whiteness Without White Supremacy, where in a panel discussion, people talked about what it means, their history, right, of who they are and who they consider their people in their community, and how white supremacy as a system causes everyone harm. And so once we opened up the conversation that it's not, this process is generative, right? So it's not about stop doing this, stop doing that, stop doing this. It's more about how do we open up for more possibilities? To not say European design is bad. European design is just one of many approaches that one can take depending on the problem you're trying to solve, right? So again, if the problem you're trying to solve is about how do I provide things cheaper and faster to the masses, right? Then it's like, I need to study what they've done in Europe because they figured out how to do it. Now, the caveat is like, how do I do that without exploiting people, right? How do I do that without destroying the environment? But there are also models to be learned, because I think in contemporary Europe, right, again, they're on the forefront of some of those efforts around sustainability because of the history, right? So what we've done is, again, help people see where they belong in the change. And it's difficult because you're dealing with who people believe they are. But when they see, by interacting with their new colleagues, right, who come from a different perspective, different lived experience, and they can share in that together, the anxiety goes down. When they have a student who has a heritage that is not European, and they want to draw upon their cultural heritage and design, and they feel anxious because I don't know anything, I know nothing about Mexican culture, right? They have colleagues who they can go to say, no entiendo, what can I do? And have guidance, right? And be able to support better the student. So we're at a place now, because we have so much diversity, that now my faculty were probably only about 60% of European heritage, getting down to 50–40% in the next couple of years. And many of them are flourishing because they've found where they belong. And my favorite example is one of my professors who was working with a graphic design student from Lagos, Nigeria. And his speciality is like Swiss grid. That was his thing. I'm all about the Swiss grid. And working with the student from Lagos, they built a grid that was based on the grill that you used to roast meat because the project that they were going to do is a branding project for this shop that roasts meat. And so his realization was that, I can still be the person whose specialty is the grid, but it's not just the Swiss grid, it's the Lagos grid, the Shanghai grid, the Ciudad de Mexico grid. And I can embrace all of that difference, but still know where I am positioned and what I can contribute to, as well as the rest. And so many of our faculty are going through that process of finding where they belong in this exchange of differences that is not hierarchical, right? But is embracing of the possibilities of our students and an embracing in the possibilities of the world, because the world is a very diverse place. But I would say it starts with hard conversations, really hard conversations, and again, knowing that people are acting out of anxiety and not resistance, right? Because normally everyone's like, oh, how did you deal with the resistance? And I'm like, it wasn't resistance because we wouldn't have succeeded if they were resisting, but they were anxious. So you had to come from a place of compassion, not stopping the change, but slowing down maybe enough to help them figure out how they fit within the change, right?
Gracias. ¿Alguna otra pregunta, observación, participación? ¿No? Bueno, sí, adelante, por favor.
I know.
We need the microphone because of our audience out of the auditorio.
Okay. How do you do to share this mindset to the students that once they graduate, they can share this kind of mindset of respectful design to their company or their new job? Do you know how this happens?
Yes. Es mucho mi trabajo. It's a lot of my work. As the dean, my job is to interface with industry, right? To, again, as I'm doing here, talk about the work of our faculty and our students so that they understand who our students are and what they're thinking. We are very fortunate that coming out of the pandemic and in the United States and Canada, the sort of Black Lives Matter movement, that many companies are wanting to embrace a more respectful way of thinking and approaching things. So our students are in many ways the leaders of helping their companies think about this, even though they're the most junior employees. But they're open, like the companies are open. But a lot of my work is meeting with companies and giving them presentations and talking to them and consulting with them to help them see, you know, not just the competitive advantage, but how they will make better decisions, more innovative decisions, by embracing these values of respect for people and respect for the land. And I'm surprised, you know, like I'm having really good conversations with Nike Corporation. I'm having really good conversations with IBM. I'm having really good conversations with tech companies. And again, they know they want to change, which is a good first step. They know they need our students to figure out how to change. And a lot of my work is working with their leadership to prepare themselves and the institution for the change, right? That's going to happen. So the talent of the student does a lot of that work, right? So when you see the outcomes, you know, they explain what they're doing in their portfolio, and the company is like, I want that kind of thinking, because it's innovative, right? Figuring out how to make things cheaper and faster and non-exploitative and supporting the environment. Like, there's a lot of innovation that comes from trying to solve that problem through design, right? And what we've done is help them see the non-exploitative part, and the sustainability part is part of how they need to define their success as well, right?
So, Dori, if I understood, you consider your students as behave as agents of change.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
very good.
yeah.
Interesting.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your podcasting. That is wonderful. And the question is, what are the very, very first steps that design students need to follow in order to be a respectful designer?
Understand themselves. They need to understand themselves. And then from there, they need to listen to deeply and understand others. And by others, we're not just talking about other people, but like the land, the water, the air, animals, the trees, right? From that understanding of who you are and how you relate to the world, that is your, that should be your motivation for designing, right? Is the deepening and the exploration of that relationship. So we start with trying to help them understand who they are. And again, you know, it's not unusual in terms of design education. We just have a different inflection on that, right? So understanding what your skills are through the teaching of skills, that's learning who you are. Understanding the aspects of processes that you like and you don't like, right? That exposure is part of figuring out who you are. But we also ask them to go deeper into who they are, so that the spirit of the design is hopefully coming from a good place, right? A place of respect, a place of humility, a place of truth, a place of love, right? That the designs are coming from that place of their being. And then we don't have to worry as much about what the manifestation is going to be. So the first step is really knowing who you are, and then that relationship of who you are to all the things that are around you and support you. And so our first step of design is like a very human one. And then, like I said, then you, from there you make, right? From there you create. But I also say, they often like to rush to the making. So we have to do projects to slow them down.
Yeah,
very
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Thank you, Dori. I'm just now thinking based also on the previous question. Has this education in design, in respectful design, led your students or your graduates to look for jobs in different fields? I'm thinking of the public sector or in the NGOs or something like that.
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense of, like, for example, when we had our last graduate exhibition for, when I went to go see the work of the advertising students, almost all of them wanted to work with community partners. And so part of this was some work that we did during COVID where we partnered with 9 Indigenous and 11 Black businesses to help them make the digital transformation, because they couldn't do their face-to-face businesses, so we developed an online sort of branding strategy for them. But they said this is like, at first I thought I was just gonna go and work for, you know, Leo Burnett, but actually now I wanna work for either smaller boutique ones or work directly in nonprofit organizations that work with community. So I would say we've broadened the perspective of what they can do with their work, and we've given them a taste of what it feels like to work in a place where you belong in a community, that they are interested in and want to do more of. At the same time, though, we also prepare them to, again, be change agents in large corporations and to go into Leo Burnett and help them thinking about better ways to do things. So I would say their focus is broad in terms of where that they can go. And it evolves. Like in the first couple of years, they may want to start with a small group, community group. But then as we think of our alumni later, they may actually want to take that learning and put it into Leo Burnett. How do I bring that to a Leo Burnett? Or how do I bring that into a large manufacturing company? So their underlying principle of who they are and what they want to do doesn't change. They just try to figure out which environments are most optimized to allow them to do that. And sometimes starting with community gives them more opportunities to develop those skills and explore, which then, like I said, they can take into a larger corporation and feel that that ethos would not be, that they are strong enough to bring that ethos into that environment.
Thank you, very interesting. Sounds like you're also educating happier designers.
We hope so. We hope so. We hope so. For us, the important thing is, like when we go back to this idea is that when we first started in this journey of respectful design, many of our students, especially again our Indigenous and racialized students, felt like they had to choose between being who they are and being a professional designer. And what we accomplish now, and they're still being able to bring into industry, is that their notion of, like, they are their own notion of what it means to be a professional designer. That they don't have to look for, they don't have to assimilate themselves to a European male model of what it means to be a designer. That they themselves are the designer in all the nuance that they bring. And they are proud of bringing that nuance because they become a model for others. So I don't know if they're happier, but I would say they're definitely more deeply grounded in who they are and know how to work with institutions to recognize that and to support that and to celebrate that. And that's what I'm hoping we've been teaching them.
¿Alguna otra participación antes de que cerremos? Erika.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting to learn about the different concepts like the new about design. You talk about the importance for respectful design, and you told us that it is to design futures with
Inclusivity.
inclusion and belonging. Could you tell us about which are the contents that you are teaching in horas?
You specific references? Yeah, okay. So one of the important articles we use is decolonization is not a metaphor, which I sort of referenced, I think, a little bit back. Other things that we are reading, we're still reading Victor Pasternak. We are reading, actually, a lot of our faculty have gone through, some of my colleagues, Silas Monroe and Brian Johnson, had developed this online course on the Black history of graphic design. So a lot of my faculty, even though they weren't graphic design, went through that just to be able to hear different perspectives. And then they did another one on Latinx design. And a lot of my faculty engaged with that one. What else are we reading? We read a lot. But I have a book coming out, which they should be reading, on decolonizing design, a cultural justice guidebook. And I'd say, so in things that I drew upon for that, it's really interesting, right? Because I feel maybe in some ways we're reading less and talking more. And what I mean by that is, like, again, we have so many diverse faculty from all over the world of different ethnicities and nuanced identities, that we're more engaged with conversation about what it is that you're doing, what is your projects, how are you shaping your curriculum with students, that we're less reading outside and more reading inside to try to get to know one another. And so I guess I'll say, some of the Sadie Redwing, who's a Dakota designer, has done amazing work on visual sovereignty. So how each nation, the importance of design in helping each nation be able to create a visual identity for themselves as a sovereign people, right? And so we've been again, in deep dialogue with her about visual sovereignty and what that means. Let's see, I guess another thing we're reading, there's a Indigenous IA group who've created a report / manifesto. So we've been engaged a lot with that because as we think about technology, that the problem with technology, again, has been the underlying consciousness behind that technology, where the relationships that we've replicated with our technology is that of master and slave. So if you come from a different consciousness, if you come from an Indigenous consciousness, if you come from a consciousness of someone who's an abolitionist, then how does the way in which our technologies function and our relationships to them change from that understanding? So we've been reading the work of that group, and it's a large group of like 22 people. What other resources reading? Yeah. Sorry, I can provide you a list later. I'm going through a bibliography. I mean, I think part of this is my role, again, is the thing is, like, I read less and talk to people more. So we're finding, like, again, we're reading less and being more engaged in conversations with one another, which in some ways is also part of I think, of a changing process, right? Because one of the values we talk about of white supremacy culture is, like, the overemphasis on the written word. And so I think even in some ways we're sort of like, let's go back to oral culture and be in conversation and community with each other, because that is how we learn also as well, right? I think there's a little bit of that going on as well.
Bien, Si no hay más preguntas, Dori, muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. It has been a very interesting conference. Los invitamos tenemos cafecito y unas galletas allá afuera para intercambiar algunas ideas. Y pues muchas gracias por su asistencia. Démosle una despedida a Dori, por favor.
Muchas gracias.
Copy? Copy. Sí. Okay.